Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining again. Today, I have a special guest, Heather Gray, AKA the Lyme Boss, and she's going to share some information about her Lyme story, as well as just sort of, information about Lyme and autoimmune conditions as well. So let's just dive in. So, Heather, welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Yay.
Tell us a little bit about your story and how you became the Lyme Boss.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And I love talking about this subject because I like educating, right? And bringing awareness to a subject that not a lot of folks know a lot about. And the information that's out there is just really bad for the most part. It's just bad. So, yeah, I was, undiagnosed Lyme disease for over 27 years. I was bit by a
Wow.
tick when I was 13. And started developing symptoms about 2 years later when I ended up the first time in the psych ward for a suicide attempt. That was the first of many. As when you get it when you're younger, and I also had a history of early childhood trauma as well as genetics for celiac. And so I kind of had this perfect storm going on that made me a perfect host when I got bit by a tick, because if you think about it, not everybody that gets bit by a tick has Lyme disease, right? So there's a couple different factors that go into play of, how's your immune system. I actually have issues in my genetics, my DNA, that doesn't allow me to detox properly. So it also makes me more susceptible to things like Lyme and mold. So like I said, there's just like this perfect little storm going on within me that definitely made me sort of more susceptible to illnesses like this. And I had it for over 27 years. Um, One of the biggest misconceptions is that everybody gets a bullseye rash. Actually, only 30% of people actually will get a bullseye rash. I did not get a
Wow.
bullseye rash. My mom took it out wrong. The old wives' tale way was to set fire to it, right, and have it back
Mm-hmm.
out. But when you do
Yep.
that, it actually makes it regurgitate you scare it.
Oh,
And so if it is carrying Lyme and infections and other issues, you're more likely to get it because now it's just regurgitated it back into your system.
wow.
Um,
I had no
so
idea.
there's two mythbusters right there. So do not take it out with flame, and do not think that just because you didn't get a bullseye rash that you're in the clear.
Awesome. Wow, that is amazing. I knew not everybody got the rash, but I had no idea it was so few actually got the rash. And then I had not heard that you should not take it out with flame. That's exactly how I always heard you should. So two things on that then. So what kinds of signs and symptoms do typically show up if they don't get the rash? How might somebody know that they should go get tested for Lyme?
So if you actually get bit by a tick and you've taken it out and you actually have the tick, best thing that you can do is actually send it in to Tickology, which is actually in my backyard in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's an awesome little lab that'll test the tick and tell you, right, whether it's carrying things that you need to worry about. And if it does, start on Doxy, 6 weeks minimum. Like that's the standard protocol. There is an herbal protocol, but when it comes to just the acute stuff, I kind of don't mess around with it, So if you can get on Doxy, and it does have to be for about 6 weeks in order to be really effective. So boom, you kind of get in the clear. You have to work on healing your gut a little bit after those 6 weeks of Doxy, but for the most part, you're good. Um, if you're not lucky enough to have the tick, or you know that you've been bit, but you start developing these mystery symptoms, right? It's pain that likes to migrate. That's a big indicator. So like one day I'd have pain in my knee, and then I'd have pain in my elbow, and then I'd have pain in my neck, and then I'd have pain in my back, which then makes you look like a hypochondriac, right? Because who has pain that migrates?
Right.
Lyme people have pain that migrates, right? So there's one big clue. You got pain that migrates. Uh, Lyme knee is a real thing. So my knee, especially my right knee, would swell way up. They couldn't figure out why. It was constantly having liquid on it and was painful. So Lyme likes to eat collagen. And where does a lot of the collagen like to hang out? It's in your joints. So that's why there's so much joint pain when it comes to Lyme disease. So joint pain's another one. Um, Gut stuff is another thing. Brain, especially in kids, like it for some reason really likes to affect the gut and the brain. And we all know that the gut and the brain is connected. That's why, my first symptoms showed up as mental emotional issues, right, with suicide attempts. So now you've got this, we got chronic pain, you have pain that migrates, Lyme knee, mental emotional issues. What else? There's so many. but it basically, they call it the great imitator, right? Because
Oh,
it can it can infiltrate any system, any organ, any tissue in the body and slowly shut it down. That and its little co-infections, they kind of work together. So people get misdiagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, bipolar, depression, anxiety. I mean, the list goes on and on. And even MS, like there's a huge percent of folks that have been diagnosed with MS that's actually Lyme disease.
wow.
Alzheimer's, it's found in brains with people with Alzheimer's and dementia. So if you've got a cognitive decline, you can have neurological issues where you can have tics. And I used to stutter a little bit. So yeah, it can show up and look like all kinds of things. So I
Wow.
usually, if you've gone to, quite a few doctors and they shrug their shoulders and they can't figure it out, I'd start digging into Lyme and mold.
Right. Wow. Wow. I had no idea it showed up as so many different things. Do those symptoms usually develop pretty quickly, or is it like 5 years down the road? Is it hard to maybe connect that you got bit with a tick because it shows up so far down the road? Or is it usually, if you were really paying attention, you might pick it up pretty quick?
It depends on the person's and their genetics and your immune system. Like I said, I was kind of the perfect storm, but I didn't even start showing symptoms till 2 years later. So we didn't connect the dots. I didn't have the rash. I didn't get a fever afterwards. So there was no sign of like sickness immediately. So for me, like I said, it was 2 years down the line when I, first suicide attempt, but
Oh,
everybody's different. And it can be really hard to connect the dots. And it's not only just from ticks, it can come from any, mosquito, fleas, bed bugs. It can be passed in utero to the baby. It's even sexually transmitted.
wow.
So yeah,
Wow. I bet hardly anybody knows that. I think everybody assumes it's tick only.
yeah, no.
That is fascinating.
No, I mean, if you
Uh,
think about it, anything that can pass, in blood, so if you got a bloodborne disease, right? How is it passed? Right. So how, why would Lyme be any different than any other bloodborne disease when it comes to how you can transmit it to others and how you can get it?
wow. That makes so much sense. So much sense.
And sadly, they call it nature's dirty needle because it doesn't usually just come with Lyme. It usually comes with Bartonella or uh, Babesia, so these other different viruses, EBV, different co-infections that go along with it. Because like I said, if you think about it, it's nature's dirty needle. It goes from one creature to another creature to another creature, like a hypodermic needle. And then by the time it
Mhm.
gets to you, it's this concoction of nastiness that can make a person really, really sick for a really long time.
Yeah, if you're going to get all those co-infections at the same time, then of course it's going to wipe you out and
Yeah.
show up as all kinds of disparate symptoms and weird things in that body. That's crazy. I had no idea. But it makes perfect sense because it is bloodborne. It makes total sense that you would not only get Lyme, but that it can show up in multiple ways, not just from a tick bite. That is fascinating. You mentioned not taking it out with the flame. So, do you have any tips on how you should remove a tick?
There are sites that will actually demonstrate. They make these special tick tweezers. I don't think I haven't been able to find them to work very well. So just a regular pair of tweezers, get as close to the skin as you possibly can and pull straight up.
Okay.
That's kind of it. But they do make special tools. There's some videos out there how to remove a tick properly. Highly recommend checking it out, especially if you live in an area that's prone to ticks, or you have animals that get ticks, because animals can get Lyme disease as well. Your pets, so you want to keep them safe.
Wow. All right. And then you also mentioned mold. So, what's the connection between Lyme and mold?
Huge connection. For some reason, those that have the DNA issues that don't allow us to detox mold do make us more susceptible to Lyme. I'm not quite sure what that connection is, but they typically go hand in hand. And I found it after I was treating the Lyme, and then after I became an FDN, because sadly, the other misconception in the Lyme world is most folks just focus on the treatment, just focus on the treatment, just focus on the treatment. And I actually did a whole webinar on this a few weeks ago on why Lyme treatments don't work and why people relapse. Because you can't just throw napalm at a person, especially if they've been sick for years, and you kill off all these critters without considering the host, right? How's the gut working? How are their detox pathways working? What are their hormones like? What's their thyroid look like? You have to take this whole picture into consideration when it comes to a whole body treatment, right? You can't just focus on, well, what, antibiotics did you take and for how long? And, I'm even seeing doctors, put PICC lines in people for like 18 months and completely destroying their gut, their brain. They've got all these long-term effects. It's almost like the treatment is worse than the disease sometimes. But so I went through FDN, cleaned up all this stuff because treatment wasn't working for me. I thought it was going to kill me. And that's when I found FDN. And when I heard the founder of FDN speak, and he was talking about, is your detox pathways open? Are you looking for other hidden stressors? And I was just like, oh my God, this makes sense. And so about 3 months after doing the program, completely turned my life around. Like my brain was working. I was no longer suicidal. My pain had gone down. I had lost like 45 pounds, but there's still something that wasn't quite right. And we couldn't figure out what it was. And it was actually the founder of FDN who's like, have you looked into mold? And I knew the house that I was living in had been water damaged at one point. These really, really, really ignorant people took off the back porch and they enclosed it and made a room out of it with drywall and carpet and put a hot tub in it.
Oh no. Oh
Yeah.
no.
I'm like, who does that? I mean, like,
Right.
oh my God, like, why not just leave it open underneath the pad, underneath the,
Yeah.
like most people would, but yeah, they enclosed it with a hot tub. So needless to say, there was a lot of mold in that room and we
Yeah.
demoed it ourselves. I didn't know any better, at the
Right.
time.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, my worst health was definitely when we lived in that house. My son's as well, when I look back at his childhood, and it just makes my stomach just drop of like, oh my God, that's what was going on with this poor kid this whole time,
Yeah.
was that house and mold. So, yeah. So once we tested, I, did a swab for my nasal to look for MRSA, found out that was positive, did some silver for about a month to kind of get rid of that, and then worked on detoxing the mold and really seemed to absolutely help. But again, there was no quick fixes. So fast forward a couple years after that, I went through a divorce, blew up my life, kind of went back to my old lifestyle, back to my old way of eating, and I relapsed. And I have spent the last year and a half cleaning up a lot of the damage that I did over those last 7 years of not following my path. I have to make sure that I'm meditating every day. I have to make sure that I'm doing my exercises to keep the trauma out of my nervous system. I have to make sure that I'm eating right and that I'm getting enough exercise and that I'm drinking healthy, clean water, like all the basics, right? You can't pass go. You cannot collect $200. You have to put the basics down as a foundation if you're going to want it, if you want to get better and you stay better, right? If you just want to waste your money on treatment and then end up right back where you were 6 months, a year to 2 years down the line, like then just keep doing what you're doing. But sadly, you're going to have to learn some new tools in order to, get long lasting health.
Yeah. And that's so true in really any kind of chronic illness. Like the foundations are where it begins, but it's also the lifestyle. You have to stick with this stuff for the long term. There's no quick fix that makes it just you're cured and you're all good to go. And now you can go back to your old life. Like that's true in all chronic illnesses. If you want to either prevent getting one or reverse what you do have, it's going to be the long haul that allows that to be true. So that's a really good reminder that, even those of us in the health profession don't always follow our own advice and don't always stick to the plan that we know we should stick to. So those of you out there that are suffering with the relapse scenario, you're not alone. It happens even to the health professionals. So
I actually got out of business during that time because I didn't want to be a hypocrite in any way, shape, or form. And I wasn't ready to walk that line. I guess I just hadn't had enough pain yet. Right. Enough motivation. And it was finally like a year and a half ago. And my husband looked at me and he was like, I'm not going to be married to an angry person anymore. He's like, I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to get it figured out. And I was about 50 pounds overweight and back to being in pain again and depressed and suicidal. And so it was like a big old smack, wake up call of like, okay, Heather, it's time to pull your head out of your butt and do what you know how to do. Put your money where your mouth is, test for your food sensitivities, right? Start there. Let's look into some trauma work and get your nervous system chilled out, because I was definitely, stuck in fight or flight, why I was so reactive and so angry. So there was definitely a lot of different things to clean up, but the body's a beautiful thing. Like when you remove a lot of these hidden stressors and these burdens off the body, like within the first like month and a half, things started to turn around, and then by 3 months, like I'm functioning on all cylinders. Like it's amazing how you can feel so bad for so long and within a short period of time turn things around.
Isn't it though? I'm always amazed at how quickly we can go from feeling terrible and like, every day is worse than the last to actually totally reversing that. It can happen really quickly. Now, of course, everybody's different. And so there's mitigating factors that can sometimes slow that healing process, but it is absolutely amazing how much progress you can make quickly by just following all of the holistic practices. It's not just about eating more broccoli, but it's the trauma work. I think that's a huge hidden piece that a lot of people don't talk enough about, that really those past traumas, the current traumas, the even the like family history traumas, all of those things really do pile up. And I think that's one that people don't talk about enough. But it's also the diet, the exercise, the sleep, the stress management. It really does take a whole picture to make an impact. But it's those same pieces that work in all of the illnesses, all of the chronic diseases, all of, any kind of imbalance. It takes all of those same steps to improve them.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, some of this stuff is so common sense. Like, one of the things I say often too is if you don't recognize an ingredient on a label, neither does your body, which then causes inflammation. Never in the history of human beings have we changed the way that we eat, the way that we sleep. I mean, so much in just a short, in the past 60 years, so we haven't evolved to living this lifestyle that we're living right now. We're still, we've gotten out of sync with nature, right? Just because we have lights on till 2 o'clock in the morning doesn't mean that we're supposed to be up till 2 o'clock in the morning. Just because something comes in a pretty package and it sits on a shelf for 5 years doesn't mean that it's good for us. Like there's just so many things, the fluoride and the chlorine that we put in our water. Like, I mean, it's asinine. And when you start looking at it as just back to basics, like that's really what I love to do. Back to basics, back to basics, back to basics, because without it, again, you can't pass go, do not collect $200. You might get a little bit better for so long. And I don't mean to be like the Debbie Downer, but that's just the damn hard truth. And I've lived it myself. I've done it myself. And I've cleaned myself back up again. And so, I know that my program works not once, but 3 times,
Yeah, that says a lot about it. The fact that you can fall off and get back on and undo the damage again. That's amazing.
Right.
Now, you also mentioned a connection with autoimmune conditions. Is that a direct connection with Lyme, or do they feed into each other? Does one make one worse? How does that whole scenario work?
I think it's just like with anything else. So things that are going to make a person more susceptible to Lyme are also going to make you more susceptible to autoimmune diseases. Right. So it's in your genetics, it's in your lifestyle. It's, what kind of trauma do you have? There's research out that folks with a high ACE score, adverse childhood events, have like a 80%, higher chance of developing an autoimmune disease later on in life. Like that has just been proven. So, like I said, so the same thing that made me a great host for Lyme also makes me more susceptible to autoimmune. And I think that's why we see them go hand in hand so much, is because there is so much of a lifestyle, genetic trauma correlation that goes with it, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that genetic component can sometimes be misleading. I think people sometimes think with a lot of conditions that, oh, my genes, I'm just destined to have that. And that's not true. All of these lifestyle factors and dealing with the trauma and dealing with all of those things are what determine whether or not those genes get activated. And so I think that's a huge component. You do have to have the genetic predisposition, but that's not a guarantee that that means that's the path you're going down. If you
Absolutely.
incorporate all of these other holistic lifestyle approaches, those genes may not ever show their ugly face.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love incorporating DNA in almost all my testing I do with folks now, because it's just, again, it's a foundation. It's a blueprint. Do you have issues, a propensity in your genes for celiac? Well, then you might just want to stay away from wheat for the rest of your life. So that way you don't kick this gene on if it's not on already. Like, but again, so there's what's the expression? There's a couple of them that, let's use the nicer one, the piano. Well, I always remembered the gun one,
Right.
So gun is the, I always forget. I go backwards.
Like
Gun is
Yeah, the genetics are the gun, the
Yeah,
lifestyle
it's the
pulls the trigger
bullet.
kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah. So yeah, just like what you said, it's not just because it's in your genes, it doesn't mean it's, be all end all and oh my God, you're doomed to all this, blah, blah, blah. No, you can turn around a lot of it, but it's just a great little tool of okay, especially for me with my issues with histamines and my issues with detox. Like so funny story about 6 months ago after I started cleaning myself up, I got all gung ho into making ferments, right? I was making my own kombucha. I was making my own kefir. I was making my own sauerkraut because this is good for you. It's all good for your gut. And back to gaining weight, back to being in pain, back to being reactive. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like within a short 2 week period of time, I just tanked. And somebody took a look at my genes and was like, oh, Heather, you don't detox histamines like at all. He's like, you should not be eating all those ferments and leftovers because I would batch cook, right? And I would have leftovers. And even though they were healthy food, they were still leftovers. So high histamines, eating a lot of vinegar, a lot of ferments, like all the no-nos for that, seem healthy, right? But for someone like me, it was bad. It was bad. It was bad. So like I said, it was just great little other foundations, things to keep in mind, right? As I go along on my health journey. But a lot of that other stuff, yeah, like I said, just because it shows something in there doesn't mean that it's going to express.
That is such a great example of why these processes, this whole healing journey has to be unique,
Yeah,
has to be
absolutely.
personalized to you. There's nothing unhealthy about the foods that you were eating, the kombucha and the sauerkrauts and all of those fermented foods and even leftovers. There is nothing necessarily inherently bad about that, but they were terrible for you. Like
Yeah,
this is why.
I'm doing a new experiment with my cat. Sorry,
No,
I
it's
didn't mean
okay.
to interrupt. But like I have a new energetic like biofeedback scanner, and this cat has itches since the day that I got her, and I've changed her food. I rotate her food. She's only eating raw now, and she still itches. Like all her other health stuff is cleared up except for this itch. And so I ran a scan on her the other day, and histamines came up, and I was just like, I when I give her food, I let it sit out until she gets done eating it. And sometimes that could be an hour or two. And really, you probably shouldn't do that with raw meat anyway. Um, but no, so now I actually need to start taking her food away within 30 minutes of setting it down because she's reacting to she's got a problem with histamines as well. And I think that's where the itching's coming from.
Oh, that's so interesting. I
Right.
just love it. But I really just really want to hone in on the bio individuality piece because so many people are like, but my sister followed this plan and it was perfect, or my coworker, or my neighbor, or my husband, or whatever. And that doesn't mean it will work for you.
Right.
So if you're doing a plan that seems perfectly logical, totally healthy, and it's making you feel worse or no better, just know that that's not a failure of you. Your biology is different and you just need a different plan. So I think that's a great example of how that
I'm even into
can
the
be.
woo woo as well as the scientific and I want to love the medical medium so much. And I've seen so many people actually go backwards on their healing journey because they're just, again, they're following a one size fits all diet. He is saying this is what will heal for everybody and this is what everybody should be eating. And it's bullshit. And the whole, like the big ounce, amounts of like celery juice first thing in the morning, like I'm kind of a big fan of, again, going back to nature. If Mother Nature intended us to have that much, concentrated, whatever, right, juice, it would come to us in that form. But it doesn't come to us in that form because we need the fiber. We need the everything else that comes with that plant, right? When you start separating something from it and then drinking it in high doses, it's going to cause imbalances other places down the line because we were not meant to consume that much celery juice every day.
100%. I agree with you on every level of that. I think there's a time and a place for things like juices.
For
They
sure.
shouldn't be our everyday staples. We should be
Absolutely.
relying on whole, natural foods in as close to their whole form as possible. I 100% agree.
Amen. Woo.
All right. Where can people find you? And do you have anything in particular that you would like to recommend people do?
Yeah, so I have got a free ebook on my site. So Discovering
Nice.
Health FDN, and it's the 6 tips for a better night's sleep. Because when we
Ooh,
talked about those
love it.
foundations of health, right? There are so many people who aren't sleeping these days. And man, I don't know about you, but when I like get one bad night's sleep, like it affects me for days. Like I don't see how people are functioning multiple days of having bad sleep, So get that sleep dialed in, some easy quick tips to really dial in, like some more of those, like maybe get off your blue light, screens that cause you to not produce your melatonin and put you in a sleep cycle right before bed. So there's just some great handy tips, some great videos in there as well, testimonials, but just a lot of awesome resources. Check it out.
I love that. Thank you so much. And we will definitely link that up so that it'll be easy for everyone to find. Anything else you'd like to share before we close out this episode?
Yeah. No matter how common a symptom may be, it is never normal, right? So stop living with your freaking daily headache. Stop living with your bloated. Stop living with the pain and start digging and looking for root causes of stuff, because those might just be little, aches and pains now, but they're going to end up leading to big things down the future if you don't take care of them. They are your check engine light coming on. Don't ignore it. Don't put a piece of tape over it. Yeah. Dig deeper.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That was the perfect way to end this episode. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom about Lyme disease and autoimmune and mold and medications and holistic lifestyle and testing and all of the things.
We talked about a lot in a very short period of
time. We cranked through all that information. So thank you so much for joining me today, and we will end it there. Thanks so much.
Thank you.